All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the House Environment and Transportation Committee for Tuesday, March 12th. We have a handful of bills, a handful of witnesses. We will start with the Frederick County delegation, HB 1017, boundary of the Frederick Soil Conservation District alteration. Mr. Minority Whip, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, Delegate Pippi here in support of HB 1017. This is a very simple bill. It deals with soil conservation districts. It actually just combines Frederick County, unlike all the other jurisdictions in the state, has two soil conservation districts. So what this does, and it's at their request, is we're combining both soil conservation districts into one for efficiency. It's supported by the delegation, by the Farm Bureau, and all the stakeholders, and we ask this committee for a favorable.
Excellent testimony. Any questions on this bill? Oh my gosh, Madam Vice Chair.
I'm sorry. Hi, Mr. Minority Whip. Do you know why is MDE unfavorable?
So I'm assuming you're referring to my second bill?
Oh, I'm sorry. That no.
So
Yes.
there's no opposition to the soil conservation bill. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Well, that, yep. No, that concludes Bill 1017. We are going to the much more complicated HB 1478, Delegate Pippi, BRF authorized uses, decommission of wastewater treatment lagoons. And if you have a panel or anything you want to bring up, feel free.
Yes, sir. So, Madam County Executive and Burgess Miller, and Paul, and you want to come up, and then we'll do either or. And we can pull a chair to the side.
There's room here.
We got room here too. Okay.
We can switch.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, committee members, Delegate Pippi again here in support of HB 1478. This is a slightly more complicated bill, but what it does is it adds a decommission of a wastewater treatment lagoon into the Bay Restoration Fund for purposes of decommissioning and building up this water treatment facility in Frederick County. So I don't have to explain it to this committee what the Bay Restoration Fund does, but many Marylanders, households pay a fee. Fee goes into a fund for the purposes of a situation like we have in Frederick County, where we have a 60-year-old open air 9 million gallon sewage lagoon that the Maryland Department of the Environment has, or the powers to be, I should say, has not renewed their permit because that facility needs to be upgraded. And so in line with, I guess, the statutory purpose of the Bay Restoration Fund, we think this is a great project to be involved with that. I have some technical folks here to offer some more information, but we hope this committee will support us in that effort. So, Burgess Miller, do you want to?
I will. Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Pippi, for your advocacy and sponsorship of this bill. Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. As the delegate stated, we're facing a state mandated $40 million overhaul of our wastewater treatment facilities, including the decommissioning of that 60-year-old lagoon on the west side of town and consolidating treatment to the east side of town. These developments were initiated by an October 2023 letter from MDE stating that our lagoon would not be receiving a permit in 2025. This $40 million overhaul is not due to poor planning, increased housing, or lack of maintenance, but by state mandate. I'll speak briefly today about the financial impacts this could have on a small town. Although the BRF subsidy reduces the town's cost to $10 million, we expect our residents to be unwilling and unable to support the largest financial obligation we've ever considered. A 30-year infrastructure loan will almost double the town's annual debt service payments from $440,000 to $860,000. The downstream effects to customers are stark. Debt per customer almost triples from $3,100 to $9,000. Annual debt service to customers more than doubles from $153 to $400. And many of our families can't afford this project. Of the 1,600 households in Middletown, 1/3 earn less than the state median household income. Of those, 190 earn less than $50,000 and 87 earn less than $25,000. We are a centuries-old municipality, and we have several critical projects in our capital program that we would like to get to. If this project is not fully funded, then that is doubtful. And we will not be able to do any other projects other than this one. This mandate will hurt our community, bankrupt our capital improvement program, and ensure we won't complete another community improvement for the next 30 years, amounting to basically fiduciary negligence. So Chair Corman and committee members, thank you for your time and consideration. We urge you to support House Bill 1478.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Frederick County Executive Jessica Fitzwater, and I'm here today testifying in support of House Bill 1478. And I want to thank Delegate Pippy for bringing this bill forward. As you've already heard others testify, and we'll hear some more technical details here shortly, this bill, which authorizes the Bay Restoration Fund to include costs related to decommissioning wastewater treatment lagoons, is critically important for one of our Frederick County municipalities and its residents. As the Frederick County executive, I am proud to work in close partnership with all of our 12 municipalities to ensure that we are providing necessary services to our community while being fiscally responsible. The current situation with Middletown's wastewater treatment lagoon challenges us on both of these two fronts. Burgess Miller and his team have been working diligently to pursue all available funding resources to offset the cost of this project, including grants from the EPA, the Creating Resilient Water Utilities Program, and FEMA, Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities. Middletown has also engaged partners at every level of government to pursue congressional spending through federal earmarks. I truly cannot overstate the dedication that Burgess Miller and his team have shown in trying to solve this problem with the best interests of our constituents at heart. Ultimately, without additional funding support, the costs incurred by decommissioning the wastewater treatment lagoon would result in significant increases to the average resident's water bill. Based on a cost assessment commissioned by the town, this would amount to a 200% increase in the average water bill, which is simply unacceptable. Burgess Miller and I understand the importance of meeting updated state regulations to ensure the health of our environment and community. The Bay Restoration Fund exists to serve as a resource to help our Chesapeake Bay watershed meet pollution requirements. Middletown residents have been paying into this fund like many Marylanders, and assisting with the cost of decommissioning this lagoon that resides in a floodplain is consistent with the mission of the BRF. And for these reasons, I strongly support this bill and request a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. My name is Paul Mantello. I'm the town administrator for Middletown. I'll speak briefly today about the technical aspects and the history of Middletown's enhanced nutrient removal upgrade. First, it's important to clarify how and when the town was notified that we'd be mandated to complete a $40 million overhaul, and also mention MDE's BRF eligibility guidelines and the implications for Middletown. On 2 occasions, MD advised informally town staff that our lagoons permit will soon change and recommended we apply for bay restoration funding. In 2021, we were approved and our preliminary engineering report is 90% complete. As you can imagine, we were very surprised and concerned by the report's high cost, the expansive scope, and the devastating financial impacts of a $10 million unanticipated long-term debt. To confirm the need for a $40 million overhaul, we reached out to MDE and requested formal notification of a future upgrade requirement. They returned a letter, which was included in your testimony submittals, explaining that the lagoon will not meet the ammonia limits or climate resiliency requirements of the next permit. Unfortunately, the cost of compliance is $40 million, and MDE's Bay Restoration Fund eligibility guidelines are clear. The technology and infrastructure that directly produces ENR treatment are funded at 100%, but the supporting infrastructure equally critical to an ENR upgrade are only partially funded or not eligible at all for funding. Typically, the cost split is 70% Bay Restoration Fund and 30% municipality, which is perhaps manageable for the average ENR upgrade, usually involving only 1 facility, not 2, as is the case for Middletown. Our $10 million cost share is extraordinary and unaffordable for a small town. House Bill 1478 amends the Bay Restoration statute to remove critical infrastructure from a flood zone and subsidize municipal ENR upgrades at affordable levels. Committee members, thank you very much for your time, and please support House Bill 1478.
Delegate Pippy, there are some other witnesses. Do you want them to go before we do questions or?
Yeah, if that's okay, Chair. Guys want to just switch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and committee members. My name is Jennifer Falcinelli, and I am a town commissioner and Burgess Pro Tem. I've served as town commissioner for 28 years and as chair of Middletown's Water and Sewer Committee for over 20 years. Middletown is a small town with only 5,000 residents and 1,700 water and sewer accounts. It is a constant challenge to fund needed infrastructure improvements with such a small customer base. In 2000, we funded a $4 million state-of-the-art East wastewater treatment plant. 20 years later, in 2020, our residents paid off this debt. Now we are facing a $40 million ENR upgrade with at least $10 million unfunded. This would almost triple our debt per customer. Our residents cannot afford this, and we have a fiducial responsibility to our residents who just paid for a wastewater treatment plant that was planned for a 40-year life. Per the preliminary engineering report, which was paid for by MDE, for Middletown to be ENR compliant, we must decommission the West Lagoon treatment plant that is in the floodplain, pump all that wastewater to the east plant, and upgrade the east plant to meet the very tight discharge limits set by MDE. All this is necessary to achieve the goal of ENR and should be considered eligible costs related to upgrading the wastewater treatment plant to ENR. If we cannot get the wastewater to the east, it cannot be treated. If this bill is passed, it would cover approximately $4 million of the $10 million that is currently unfunded. We would still have approximately $6 million in costs to attempt to fund with our very small customer base. The Burgess and commissioners are asking for your help and support. Middletown has unique challenges in this ENR upgrade, and the increased subsidy in House Bill 1478 will help enable Middletown to achieve ENR treatment. Removing infrastructure from a floodplain and pumping the wastewater to the east plant is 100% necessary to achieve ENR, and is 100% logical that the Bay Restoration pay for 100% of these costs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. It's good to be back. Attorney Roger Mano, on behalf of the town. I would hope that a situation like this, a terrible situation like this, never happens in any of your districts. But of course it won't, because this is the only facility like this in the state of Maryland, the only open air wastewater treatment lagoon, 9 million gallon open air wastewater treatment lagoon in a 100-year floodplain that's legally operating in the state of Maryland. It's an anomaly. So how did we get here? Before the legislation was introduced, Chair Feldman and Senator Lewis Young and Delegate Pippy and members of the town sat down with MDE, and we were scratching our heads as to why MDE believed that this was not covered under the current Bay Restoration Fund. For those of us who've worked on this piece of legislation, it's terribly important to us, terribly important to the Chesapeake Bay watershed, of which the town is a part. And there's two parts of the statute that are relevant here. There's one part that deals with wastewater treatment lagoons that is reimbursable at a level of 50%. And there's another part that was added to the BRF that says if you have a facility that poses a threat to water clarity or public health, it shall be reimbursable at 100%. Now, why did we put that in the statute? Because I'm a former lawmaker, y'all thought that it was so important that if a water project became a threat to public health, that it should be elevated to the highest level of reimbursement. We are vexed to think of a greater threat to water clarity or public health than an open air 9 million gallon wastewater treatment lagoon in a 100-year floodplain sandwiched with 3 waterways that flow into the Chesapeake Bay. For these reasons, we'd ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? All right, I need a little help here, so forgive my ignorance. I spend too much time downstairs in a money committee. So we have a gap here. Is that the issue? You want BRF to reimburse this product at a higher rate? Is that accurate, Delegate?
Yeah, so there's a $10 million gap and the town is coming up with 6 million of it. And so 4 million is the ask. And yeah.
Okay, and since the county executive is here, I have to ask, is the county assisting financially as well, or?
Not at this time, but we have written letters of support for all of the congressional earmarks and the other funding sources and grants that the town is looking for and have been supportive partners along the way with that. As was already stated by Mr. Mano, I think originally our interpretation was that the Bay Restoration Fund was going to reimburse at 100%. And when the alternate or the other interpretation kind of came forward, we started looking at additional options. And this legislation, as was stated, since this is a one of its kind in the state, felt like a proper path forward.
Okay, so you either need this different interpretation or change in the law or $4 million, is that?
Mr. Chairman, it's our belief, based on our read of the BRF, that it is covered right now. The legislation would simply codify that interpretation.
Right.
The only other way to determine whether it's covered or not is through a jury, and I don't think we want to entertain that. So
Right, so just to be clear, I was gonna say Delegate Mano, Roger, you either need $4 million under the MDE's interpretation of the BRF, or you need the BRF interpreted, whether this bill or by MDE itself, to match at the higher level. Is that
yes, sir, that's correct.
okay? Other questions? Delegate Healy.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I also spent some time on the Money Committee. And so I have a couple questions. Would Delegate, as a sponsor, you know, especially in these times, one of the things we always ask is when people want things that cost the state money, are you willing to support a fee increase or a tax increase to cover those costs and spread them across the entire state rather to the benefit of this one town?
Did he put you up to this?
I'm just
kidding. I'm just kidding.
Sir, no,
So look,
I have been asking this question for 30 years.
absolutely. So I'll answer your question. So there's 17 homes. Each of these homes have been paying $5 a month for 10 years for this Bay Restoration Fund. 1,700 homes.
Yep.
So you multiply that out, that's over $1 million. So these residents have already paid over $1 million for a situation such as this. The other thing is this project is $40 million project. And I'm going to answer your question, I promise. It's a $40 million project. They have figured out a way to get to 90%. So they're at $36 million right now. We've got to go that extra for. As far as increasing fees, that's a tough question. The reality is these people have already been feed. You know what I mean? Everyone's already paying $5 a month for a situation like this, where you have, again, $9 million open pit sewage lake that's sitting right next to a fresh waterway. And through no fault of this town has done everything right. There's never been a violation. They've complied with state law since 1960 when the state told them they had to put the lagoon there. And here we are, the MDE 12 months ago says, oh, by the way, you need a $40 million upgrade like in 2 years. You have 24 months to come up with $40 million. It's crazy. And so as far as raising fees, I think this committee's raising fees already. Right? I mean, we've seen some fees come out.
But not for this.
Well, I mean, look, if
could.
you have a separate bill that doesn't have my name on it that raises a fee, you know, then that's your business, right? But I think in all fairness, these folks have already been feed. I mean, the fees have already been collected for a project. There's no better project in the state than this situation because it is ready to explode. I mean, you've got, like I said, it's a dangerous situation. The state wants it fixed. And that's what we're here to do, is fix it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, one other small question. How did they come up with calling this a lagoon?
That's a great,
Good question.
Because I usually think of the South Seas and beautiful.
yeah, I'm not
properties.
swimming in it.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Okay, Delegate Pippi, I hope you enjoyed your time in ENF today.
Did.
We have no more questions, so thank you all for the bill.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chair.
so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
I see
Madam
we
Vice Chair.
have
Thank you.
Delegate Simmons, looks like he's ready to go, so we will bring him up for HB 573, Citizens Committee for the Enhancement of Communities Surrounding BWI.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and distinguished committee members. Gary Simmons, District 12B, Anne Arundel County, on House Bill 573. This is a short fix in that district, which is a new district surrounding the BWI Citizens Committee that consists of the enhancement for Washington, Baltimore International Airport. Within the 2-mile radius, it encompasses Howard County and Anne Arundel County. Both these county delegations have signed off on an amendment that would allow for an additional person to be assigned by the Maryland Aviation Authority to the board of the citizen community. So what that means is that in my district, as a new district, it allows for me to appoint someone on that board that's a 2-mile radius of the airport. This was allowed representation for my district as a new district in 12B, and would allow us to work directly with the airport, dispensing funds to community organizations that are collected by the airport to deal with the noise ordinance surrounding the airport area. I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the sponsor? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 573. Do I see Delegate Adams back there? House Bill 1512, Bay Restoration Fund, use of funds, community wastewater facilities, sunset repeal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. For the record, Delegate Chris Adams presenting House Bill 1512, which is a fairly simple bill. I'll just speak on to the bill. It repeals the sunset that came from the bill that I passed in 2020 related to municipal wastewater facilities. And the legislative intent of the bill is to allow current projects and potentially near-term projects to continue through the lens of good public policy that we passed a few years ago. And how about if I just leave it with, it's a good bill, and I ask for your favorable report. It's an important bill. You'll see some testimony in your file, and thank you for your kind consideration, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we also have a representative from the Maryland Municipal League who is going to testify? I want to bring them up as well before we do any
Sure.
questions. And I know you have a virtual witness too, Delegate.
Yes, actually a very good virtual witness if she's on. Good friend of mine.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Angelica Bailey Thupari for the Maryland Municipal League. We thank the sponsor for putting this bill in. It would benefit municipalities and our residents. We ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Great. And let's bring up the secretary to go ahead and provide her testimony as well. Madam Secretary, please go ahead. That's you, Jeannie.
Well, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 1512. With the passage of similar legislation in 2020, many residents and businesses were able to access resources, filling septic systems more quickly. Our firm works with a lot of local governments and a lot of businesses and a lot of residents that are trying to do just that. And unfortunately, with the sunset that was added to the 2020 legislation, without legislative action, they will no longer be able to take advantage of that expedited process. So with that in mind, and knowing that this is an opportunity for us to advance our Chesapeake Bay restoration goals more quickly, I would like to thank you for your past support of the 2020 legislation and respectfully request your support of House Bill 1512. And thank you very much again for the time.
Great. Any questions for the panel? Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the bill here in HB 1512. We'll go to HB 1511, Delegate Love, Forest Conservation Act modifications.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of ENT. Good to see you this afternoon. For the record, Delegate Sarah Love here to present HB 511. As you all will recall, and many thanks to the incredible work of the Vice Chair, last year we passed an update to the Forest Conservation Act. We have found that I should say that MACO has found with the coming of the effective date, there are some counties who are finding it challenging to be in compliance with the law, they need some more information from DNR. DNR has provided everything they were statutorily obligated to do. But in discussing this kerfuffle, conundrum, however we want to call it, we came up with this bill to give those counties a little bit more time to come into compliance with the law. In trying to do that, we also ran into some other challenges with moving the effective date back of the forest mitigation banking and some of the other pieces that my panelists can give you the technicalities on. But in sum, this is to help those counties that aren't yet ready, who want to, but aren't yet ready to comply with the Forest Conservation Act, and give them the tools that they need to do so, and also make sure that we're not doing any damage in any other way. And with that, I'd ask for a favorable report on 1511, and I will turn it over to DNR.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Dylan Baylor, Legislative Director at the Department of Natural Resources. Firstly, I'd like to thank Dom and the sponsor for working with us on this issue. I think the biggest thing to say from the outset is nothing in this bill changes the policy that this committee passed last session. I think we worked really hard to be able to accomplish that. And really high level, what this committee and the General Assembly did last year with the Forest Conservation Act was we kind of created a two-prong approach to meeting the new standard that we set in law. One of those standards were new updated replanting and reforestation and afforestation ratios. But then at the same time, we also said that a county could adopt an alternative compliance plan so long as it met the no net loss standard at a countywide basis. What we have found, and Dom will speak to, there are counties that want to do that are excited about that. But as we looked back on the bill last year, the timeline didn't really work out to be able to give the counties all the information that they needed to do just that. So that timeline originally was December of this past year, 2023. We had to provide an updated guidance on how we'll evaluate local plans, which we did do. Then the law was supposed to go into effect of July of this year. And then next December, the department has to promulgate a new technical manual to what these new standards are going to be for the Forest Conservation Act. I think what we've learned is that technical manual is actually going to be something that's necessary for the counties to implement the law. So what this bill does is it delays the effective date by 2 years. Additionally, it does put additional requirements on the department in that period before the law goes into effect. We have to update regulations and provide additional guidance like a model ordinance. Then lastly, on mitigation banking, what we did learn was that, and we're working on amendment with all the different partners. The mitigation banking was originally going to go into effect of July of this year, and we need to allow that part to still go into effect this year, while delaying the rest of the bill to ensure that counties that want to use that practice have the ability to do it, because it would have expired in 2024. So with that, we request a favorable report.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Don Butchko with the Maryland Association of Counties. I would like to thank the sponsor and DNR for working so closely with us. I echo everything that DNR has just said. The one thing I want to underline with this bill is local jurisdictions are committed to implementing our forest conservation update. We just need a little bit more time and resources to do that. We are partnering with the state to make sure that we can implement this fully and to the best standard possible, and we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Questions for the sponsor or her panelists? Okay, I do not see any, so thank you, Delegate. There are some favorable amendment witnesses, the law firm of Enton and Graff, Tom Ballantyne, and Jordan Balcom-Colber. If you can all come up. Please go ahead when you're ready.
I'll go ahead and start. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Just like to echo everything that was said by the previous panel. We do support this bill. As you are well aware, this was a very complicated piece of legislation that passed last year. It was a compromise legislation. So we support this. We also support the amendment that's forthcoming, which is the amendment that we have also been working with the DNR on. So we support this with the amendment. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Robert Etten on behalf of the Maryland Building Industry Association. I'd like to very much thank the sponsor, the department, MACO, for agreeing to the amendments on this bill. I think it's refreshing that, you know, we can pass something and come back if there's a problem in implementing it and update it. So we thank you very much. And with the amendments, we support the bill.
Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the delegation. My name is Jordan Baucom Colbert. I'm the Government Affairs Liaison in the Office of General Counsel for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. Our board has voted to support this bill with amendments. We also written testimony for the record. Last year, the commission worked diligently with the bill sponsors of the Forest Conservation Act bill that was passed last year. Therefore, we have an interest in the modifications of this bill. We are concerned about the provisions of this bill and the impact it would have on both of our counties, Montgomery and Prince George's, which is significant and we believe is unattended. The current effective date to move the forest mitigation banking efforts forward is July 2024. However, the bill as written could delay the commission's ability to conserve existing forest mitigation banks. Montgomery County Planning is completely out of mitigation banks and has a waiting list of applicants who are ready to create existing forest mitigations in July when the law goes into effect. This delay jeopardizes those efforts. We propose that the sponsor amend the language of the bill to keep the section referencing the mitigation banks for July 2024. If the bill passes in its current form, it could seriously hinder the commission's ability to conserve forests if we cannot use existing forest banks in the other two counties. And I understand that there are some amendments that the department has been working on to rectify our concerns, and we respectfully appreciate that. So we recently received those today and hope that they work towards in our favor. Thank you.
Tom Ballantyne on behalf of NIOP Maryland, me too.
Excellent testimony. Any questions for this panel? Okay, thank you all. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 1511. We'll now turn to Delegate Rosenberg, House Bill 492, Baltimore City Speed Monitoring Systems on Interstate 83. If you have a panelist or anything, feel free to bring them up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. By this committee's action, I believe it was 3 years ago, authorizing the installation of 2 speed cameras on the JFX Interstate 83, the Jones Falls Expressway, that links North Baltimore to South Baltimore and Baltimore County to downtown Baltimore. We have made a significant impact on speeding and, more importantly, safety of people driving on the JFX, which I'm sure includes a good number of you on this committee. However, whether you are driving downtown to work, to eat dinner, or perhaps even to go to a baseball game, there still remains a problem. It is the norm when I drive the JFX that there is, I have my meter on 50. I figured out how to do that in my car. But there are people who are going by me more than 12 miles an hour above the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit consistently. In the sense of every time on the JFX, there's going to be at least one car that is doing more than 60 miles an hour. This bill is before us, approved overwhelmingly by the Baltimore City House delegation to enhance enforcement of the law that we passed. There is, for fiscal year, I believe it's 23, more than 2 million in unpaid citations, certificates, tickets, whatever the term of art is. And this bill seeks to address that as a way to deter the people who continue to violate, and consistently, because this bill would apply to people who owe at least $250, which $40 per ticket is $7 unpaid tickets for driving on the same Jones Falls Expressway. The bill would do two things. It would give the city the authority to put a boot on someone's car, which means it immobilizes the car, but is less of a burden. The bill is, I think an amendment originally before the delegation would have authorized towing, where we decided instead as a delegation to authorize the boot, which simply immobilizes the car where it is. And we would also require that when a license, because you don't know who's driving, you just have the photograph as if you may have gotten a speeding ticket along the way, that we only know which the car certificate. We don't know who was driving, but under the amended bill, the bill is, it would now be before you. If you have, after you're starting with your 5th ticket, you would be the owner of the car who has the registration would be notified that when you get to 7, in addition to the boot, the fact that you have these unpaid violations would be sent to MVA for the purpose of holding the registration. That is, you could not renew your registration at the end of I believe it's the 2-year period, number one. And number two, you could not sell the car with that registration until these tickets were paid. And there are a significant number of people who owe over $1,000. So this bill does two things. Says once you get to owing $250, you can be booted and your car doesn't move until you pay the debt. And the city would be obligated to send to Motor Vehicles Administration the fact that you have this payment, this overdue payment, and therefore the effect, as I just described, on your registration would come into play. So with overwhelming approval from the city delegation, this amended bill, I would urge your favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
And the city is here to testify in support. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank
Ms.
you.
Themelis.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the committee. My name is Nina Themelis, Director of Government Relations for Mayor Scott, here to testify favorable with amendments as described by the sponsor for House Bill 492. As mentioned, the bill would require Baltimore City to report to the MVA moving violations, amassing more than $250 for speeding violations on I-83 alone. The amendment that the delegate outlined would allow us to immobilize those vehicles. We have had those cameras in place for slightly less than 2 years, and we have had several analyses performed that do show that we have been seeing slower vehicular speed along the highway, but that people continue to travel at a dangerous speed. We have thousands of violations that still exist along the highway, and as we know, when someone receives an automated citation, there are no late fines, penalties, or additional amounts added to that initial fine amount. So we don't have a lot of enforcement capability currently in the city to compel individuals to pay those fines. We also have seen through car accidents that have happened in other jurisdictions, such as Washington, D.C. last year, where people who continue to accrue multiple citations over a period of time, especially when they remain unpaid, could be more dangerous drivers. And so while one component of this legislation is to compel people to pay off their fines and to comply with the law, the other part is that if someone is repeatedly violating the law, it's possible that they may also be just driving recklessly on a continuous basis. And so for those reasons, we urge a favorable report for this bill for both safety reasons and obviously for the fiscal component.
Any questions for the Delegate Jacobs?
Chairman. So Delegate
can you tell me where else this type of process is in play? Like, I know they flag vehicles and they can't renew your tags if you accumulate a pretty sizable number of violations, but is this a common practice to do both the boot and the flagging both? I mean, I haven't heard a lot about that.
Well, this committee would know better than I what the history is and what other options, if the history on enforcement of traffic violations. I do not know. We felt as a delegation that both these options should be available. Both the lesser form of immobilization with the boot, but from the outset, the bill spoke to reporting to MVA. This is an existing policy at MVA in terms of and as an enforcement mechanism for other violations. We didn't invent it wasn't our idea, the concept of MVA being able to, or having the authority to say, you cannot renew your certificate or you cannot sell your car until you meet these obligations. That is an existing practice.
Yeah, I understand that. It was the boot portion of it that I was kind of questioning. That I know they have the ability to flag, because especially if you have drivers in in trucks you may own that accumulate these things and never tell you. Comes time for renewal time, where'd this come from? And I'm familiar with that practice. But I was just curious about the boot portion, but we'll discuss it in subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the sponsor started the presentation off with how well the cameras had been working and that people have slowed down. So this bill is about collection of debts. Is that correct?
Collection of debts from those who have, at a minimum, 7 unpaid violations, with a significant number owing $1,000.
Okay. And
so that's more than a handful.
Okay. And your other witness mentioned that somehow this would help take reckless drivers off the road. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Especially the immobilization amendment. So when we see drivers, especially given that the cameras have been in place for less than 2 years, and we have a number of drivers, I would say about, sorry, one moment. We have about 1,500 drivers at least that have more than $250 in fines, and this data is a couple months old, that when someone is having that many violations over a fairly short period of time, they're repeatedly speeding on the roads. And so the intent of this legislation is to not only, obviously there's a fiscal component, but if they've amassed that many fines in such a short period of time where these cameras have been in place, then there is a likelihood that they are driving recklessly, not only on I-83, but in other areas across the city and in other counties.
Okay, and this does not just apply to Baltimore City residents. If I speed through and I get tickets, you can take my car too. Thank you.
And if I may, I-83 is not Rail Boulevard. It's up and down, it's curves. Beside the speed limit, it's not the safest road to travel. So the speed limit and the nature of the expressway makes it very dangerous.
Any additional questions? Okay, thank you. That concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 492. We'll now turn to Delegate Howard, HB 1360, School Bus Transition Propane Powered School Buses Grant Program Fund and Purchase. If you have a witness, feel free to bring them up.
Thanks. Sure. Mr. Chair, in the interest of time, may I call up my panel? Thank you. Chair, Vice Chair, colleagues, great to see you again. For the record, Delegate Seth Howard, pleased to bring before the committee HB 1360. This is School Bus Transition Propane Powered School Buses Grant Program. This bill expands the Zero Emission Vehicle School Bus Transition Grant Program by incorporating propane-powered school buses within existing provisions governing zero-emission school bus vehicles. I would just like to bring to the committee's attention that this was voted 13-0 by the Anne Arundel County delegation, fully supported by the Anne Arundel County Board of Education. And also, if you would direct your attention to paragraph 3 of the Maryland School Bus Contractors Association, and it reads, HB 1360 would allow for propane-powered school buses to qualify as a bridge in meeting the current mandates. Propane-powered school buses as part of the zero emissions requirement is a clean, smart alternative to diesel or gasoline. Propane-powered school buses are an existing technology with an in-place infrastructure that can provide cleaner school bus operation right now. Currently, there are 129 propane school buses already operating in the state of Maryland. So this bill is in no way a no to the electrification of school bus vehicles. This bill is a bridge to the electrification of school bus vehicles. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions, but I'd like to turn it over to my panel.
My name is Randall Jubb. I'm a Anne Arundel County school bus contractor. We have currently been operating in our fleet of 90 buses, about 35 propane. And the impact of putting those buses into our fleet was one of a smooth transition, something that could happen quickly. And we have realized through the Maryland Environmental Agency that when we purchase those buses, we get a grant for a portion of the cost of those buses. And in doing that, we've gotten feedback from them for the amount of particulate matter that we have taken out of the air off of the roads by providing that information to them. And it's a very large amount. So even though we realize that propane ain't zero emissions, it is much better than what we're currently doing for electrification in our county, which is zero electric buses. So they're not cleaning nothing. And we do see contractors purchasing propane. So it would be smart, we feel, that to continue to purchase those and there's all kind of stuff in our fleets that we've monitored as well. But we do see a significance of a reduction already in the propanes, and we plan to continue with that program.
Thank you. Any questions? Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Propane is still you're burning it and releasing emissions. Is that correct?
Sure.
And I'm also reading something that says that propane actually emits more carbon monoxide. So it's an air quality issue, not just a climate issue. And I just wondered if you wanted to address that.
I can't speak totally to that. I know that what we've done with Roush also and their computations on that, I'm not sure. I know it lowers NOx significantly, which was an issue in the particulate matter, whereas the diesels would, and I'm speaking comparing the propane to the diesel, significantly reduce particulate matter because they do not need to have any type of after treatment systems on those vehicles to clean the air. That's where in our industry, it was NOx and particulate matter. So I'm not sure about CO2 emissions.
So good. Just to be clear, carbon monoxide, not CO2. So CO2 is not harmful.
Okay.
Carbon monoxide is harmful. So
that might be above my pay grade to speak on
okay.
that.
Thank you.
Delegate Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question on the mechanics of the propane usage, because I'm not familiar with it at all. Can you drive up to a pump someplace and pump propane into a bus, or do you have to have a huge storage facility somewhere, or?
Well,
do you-
that,
Or do you just buy propane tanks and attach them to the bus? I'm not familiar with this at all.
Thank you for the question. That's a good question. We on the operators that do that, they have put some public fueling stations around, and these will be provided with the manufacturers of the different propane distributors, that are doing it. But the propane distributor that I use provided a facility and implemented right in my two of my bus yards, which is just like the propane tank. You get your grills filled with, except it has a different adapter, and they fill it just like a diesel bus. It has a nozzle and it clicks in and fills up.
Just thank you very much.
Yes.
Look at Seafly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to ask, how much do propane powered school buses cost relative to electric ones, and how long do they last?
Propane is longevity, I believe, is no different than what we're currently, a diesel bus or a gasoline powered bus. There are some gasoline powered buses in the state, but the propane is a converted gasoline engine for that is done by a manufacturer. And compared to the EV, we're talking $375,000 for an EV bus, and we're talking about a $140 for a propane bus, which, that cost for our county, which we bid on when they mandate that they're actually picking and choosing the routes that they want them on, because there's limitations to running an EV bus on something that runs all day. It's got tons of limitations on it, but that would be passed along when we bid on our routes. So that cost will eventually get to the taxpayers.
And in terms of how long they last?
They're estimating for the electric bus and batteries to last 8 years before some replacement degradation happens and replacement. And that in that there are duty cycles that they charging a battery back up several times. They have a calculation for that, how long it'll last. But our buses in this county, we're allowed to operate them 12 years, and then we have to replace them. That's the limitation on it. So we're not making the 12 years for an electric bus without replacing those batteries, which is a significant cost as well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Delegate Creighton.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing the bill. Delegate Ziegler actually hit on one of my questions. I wanted to ask you, I guess, more directly, are there any reasons other than cost that you would prefer to use propane? Are we really just talking about the cost of the buses? And I've got two questions. The second one is, does this bill, it looks like as written, it sort of it interchangeably refers to zero emissions and propane buses. Do you see a time when if you're able to do this for a certain period of time, that you would then transition purely to zero emissions? So those are two. Is it really just about the cost?
I don't believe EV bus is zero emissions. For one thing, because there's all kind of factors to go into that can be talked about. But I think that that we are headed in that direction. The infrastructure's not there. BG&E, all of them are. We're working with them, but there's still grants that are being formed, and we can't even get the infrastructure done ahead of time to know what we're can get the grant for. So I don't know if I wouldn't interchange propane with zero emissions or EV, because it's not, but it's such a much cleaner burning. We're sitting at schools picking up children. We understand that we cut them off, but it's nice when we start them that you feel like it's a lot cleaner coming out of the exhaust pipe than a diesel is.
So the reason for the bill is the emissions. Not the emission. The reason for the bill is the cost and the infrastructure. Is that what we're hearing?
Yes, I believe that's 100% correct.
Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, one of the things, for example, I mentioned that this was fully supported by the Board of Education in Anne Arundel County. The reason I mention that is because the 2025 budget for Anne Arundel County Board of Education is set. So, you know, even if we were to start looking at budgeting for the infrastructure to put this type of electric vehicle charging stations into the 13 high schools in Anne Arundel County, we're looking at 2026 at the earliest, probably 2027, 2028. My thought is, realistically, between you and I, colleague, is 2029 is more realistic. So essentially what we're trying to do is, like I said, bridge that gap. That's exact that, you know, and colleague, to your question, my dad was a small school bus contractor in Howard County. I think at one point he had 6 to 9 buses. So that would have been $1.5 million to a single father to upgrade his fleet that was raising 2 amazing sons. So yes, that it's about infrastructure and cost. Yes, ma'am.
Last question on the bill, Delegate Jacobs.
Mr. Chairman, so the gentleman in the center here with the buses. In the rural parts of the state, it's not uncommon for the bus route to just continue. They take like one loop, bring those students in, go right back out again because of the limited buses and the length of these routes are pretty long in rural parts of the state. So it's pretty difficult, isn't it, to do that with EV bus, number one. I mean, it's a challenge, I should say, in the rural parts when you're running double routes back to back.
It is.
Isn't that
They
true?
call that tiering, the routes, elementary, middle, high, tier them to go in the morning and then same come in the afternoon. Some routes are much longer. You're correct. We do a lot of out of county, out of state running. Those schools that we service for them would have a whole different set of parameters for when they're saying that we're going to be bidding on buses, which we do in our county, Anne Arundel, and they would specify these won't work for electric buses. So to say it's 100% electric, that's probably not. Even the EV guys in the stuff that I've been to said that they don't fit every particular bus route at this point. So you would kind of bring them in. And you're right, the rural areas, they just couldn't do it with one bus for that route. And they would continue to use whatever the alternative is. And then one of the things about that is propane would be great for that long route alternative or a bus that did a midday run too. So that's another reason that we feel gas propane is a viable option there for that long run.
And you started that hearing as a transition vehicle to go in between. And when you agree that would be a good transition.
I do agree it would be
from where we are now into where we're trying to go.
Correct.
Because I know it's a reality over there and the school system, especially my home county, they own the school bus system. And, you know, we're also getting smeared with the blue ribbon cost. And so the cost becomes a factor. This double, what you call tiering is a factor. But over there, we also had legislation passed where they went from 12 to 15 years on these
life cycle of the bus.
Several counties, you know, they have to pass inspections, yada, yada, yada. But when you look at it, not only the efficiency, but the cost versus an 8-year lifespan on the battery of an EV, how much does that battery replacement cost? Do you know?
I think that's in the neighborhood of $40,000
to replace
at this time. Yeah.
To replace the battery?
To replace the battery set. Yeah.
Okay.
If it's different technologies out there, depending on what you look at for manufacturer to do partial replacements and stuff like that.
All right. So, thank you.
Sure. Great. As I said, Delegate Jacobs was the last question. That concludes the bill hearing HB 1360. Moving on to HB 1410, Delegate Howard, Anne Arundel County Committee for Individuals Who Lived Experiences to Impact Policy on Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, for the record, Delegate Howard, pleased to present HB 1410, Anne Arundel County Department of Housing and Community Development, Anne Arundel County Committee on Individuals with Lived Experience to Impact Policy on Homelessness. This bill establishes an Anne Arundel County Committee on Individuals with Lived Experience to Impact Policy on Homelessness, staffed by the Department of Housing. As amended, the bill was struck, and it essentially allows for a veteran member with lived experience in homelessness to serve on the commission. And yeah, so that's the current posture of the bill, and it was voted out unanimously by the Anne Arundel County delegation.
Any questions on this piece of legislation? Okay, thank you, Delegate Howard. We appreciate it. That concludes the bill here on HB 1410. We'll turn to our final bill, HB 1509, Delegate Stein, Baltimore Regional Water Governance Model Work Group established.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members, for the record, Delegate Dana Stein on House Bill 1509. Last year, you probably recall that we set up, this was through House Bill 843, the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force. At the recommendation of Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott and Baltimore County Executive Johnny Oshefsky, this task force was charged with looking at the governance of the region's water and wastewater systems, specifically recommending the governance model best suited for these systems and any necessary legislation and funding to establish the recommended model. The task force met 7 times during the interim and reviewed extensive materials that were provided by the consultant hired for the task force. I represented the House on the task force. We considered different options for changing the governance model of the region's water and wastewater systems. These included a regional governance model in which Baltimore City and Baltimore County systems are merged into a regional entity along the lines of WSSC. And we also looked at, for example, keeping the current systems intact, but making some improvements. Ultimately, the task force did not make a categorical recommendation on what the future model for water and wastewater should be. The task force acknowledged that a regional governance model showed promise in addressing regional concerns about the existing governance structure, which the other options did not. But we didn't have time to do the requisite due diligence that fully recommending the regional governance model required. The task force didn't have time to analyze and assess the different criteria in the House bill and others that were raised during the process of our work that related to the potential transition from the existing systems relating to water and wastewater to a regional, more consolidated system. And these issues range from equity impacts, the impact on the workforce, operation and maintenance, capital improvement, planning, debt service, pension and benefits, stormwater research, et cetera. The report was due under the bill that we passed last year, January 30th of 2024. So despite the extensive work that was put in by the task force and the consultants, we again felt that we couldn't do all the due diligence necessary to come up with a categorical recommendation. So what the task force recommended is that this due diligence be done by a subsequent working group over the course of the next 3 years, with results informing the best regional governance structure for a regional utility. The proposed work group under the bill would have the same composition as the task force that we set up last year. Not necessarily the same members, but a total of 13 members, including 5 appointed by the Mayor of Baltimore, 3 by the Baltimore County Executive, 2 by the Governor, 1 House, 1 Senate member, and 1 from Anne Arundel County, Carroll County, Howard County, or Harford County. And the work group would have 3 years to do its study and report back by mid-2027. The task force did make the assessment that some of the research, some of the analysis that would be required was very specialized and beyond the scope of either the Baltimore City or county law department. So requested resources from the state for this specialized legal counsel, as well as experts on equity analysis, which is a very important issue that was raised during the task force's review. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge a favorable report and happy to have the representatives from both Baltimore County and Baltimore City who are here amplify on this recommendation.
I'm gonna go first. Thank you, Chair Corman, members of the committee. Richard Luna, I'm the interim director for the Department of Public Works. And on behalf of the Baltimore City Administration, we are supportive of House Bill 1509. I won't get into all the details that Delegate Stein just mentioned because those were included in our notes. But Baltimore City Department of Public Works and Baltimore City are in support of this legislation. We're happy to help and work on any kind of next steps in looking and analyzing the overall governance structure for the Baltimore Regional Task Force. We want to applaud both Delegate Stein and Deputy Buckler for their work on the task force and all of the members for spending countless hours and multiple meetings and studying this issue. And we look forward to the next steps of this legislation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair. I'm Lauren Buckler. I'm the Deputy Director for Public Works and Transportation for Baltimore County. I was honored to serve on this task force from last year's legislation. I want to thank both Baltimore City, Director Luna, and Delegate Stein for their work on the task force as well. We want to support task force HB 1509. It's important work. It needs to continue. There's a couple threshold issues that Delegate Stein mentioned that really need more work to figure out than the couple months that we had. So those important issues are the equity analysis, the financial implications, which include the debt restructuring and the pension liabilities, along with operational billing customer service issues. We really want to make sure we can continue that regional dialogue and work through those logistics in these next steps. So I think it's important that we move forward with this. I also want to say that the makeup is critical of this task force. It was agreed upon by Baltimore City and Baltimore County. It worked out in the last go around of this. Entities that were interested in being a part of this were able to work through the governor, the mayor, and the county executive in order to make sure their voices were heard on this committee and that they were well represented. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. A question from Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Stein, for your work on the task force, which is so important, and really, appreciate that. So I noticed that there's a lot of favorable with amendments testimony with suggested amendments, and I just wondered if you had a chance to look at those, if you've discussed any of those amendments.
Short answer is no, haven't looked at all the amendments. I believe there may be some amendments relating to the composition of the work group, and well, I'm happy to take a look at those. As Ms. Buckley said, the way the task force ended up being structured this past year worked well, and key voices were able to be heard, and so that's why we're sort of replicating the structure of the work group from the task force. So that's why in follow-up discussions with jurisdictional representatives, we thought, okay, let's keep the structure the same. Now, it doesn't mean can't take a look at those amendments and possibly consider changes, but I will say that the structure worked well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you certainly would know that because you were on the work group, but there's a difference between having your voices heard and having a seat at the table. And wouldn't you think that, I mean, isn't it so, but that unions should probably have a seat at the table because of the large potential impact on workers of this kind of a change in structure where they may have, contracts and things that are affected by it.
Sure. I mean, I will say that I believe it was one of the governor's appointees was a representative of organized labor. So labor did have a seat at the table. I understand that perhaps the specific request is to identify particular, from a particular union, or to say specifically has to be some, one of the members has to be from organized labor. And I'm certainly happy to, to consider that. And at the same time, you may remember, Delegate, last year with respect to the task force, we were inundated with requests from different groups to have representatives. And because of the agreement going in between the mayor and the county executive, we, as to the composition of the task force, we said, okay, we're going to keep it the way it is.
Sure.
But-
I do remember that and I appreciate that. I just think, in this case, we're kind of getting down into the nitty gritty of it more. But just one more of these amendments I wanted to ask you about, Mr. Chair, would that be okay? Thank you. And so in the equity section, one of the suggested amendments was about adding an analysis on disparate impact specifically. And is that something that you would consider including? The disparate impact on, given the consequences of segregation in Baltimore City and County.
I will say, sure, I'd be happy to consider that. The equity issue was really, in terms of the task force discussion and what's meant to be reviewed through this new work group is really at the very top. And I think it covers a number of different issues that were raised by not just task force members, but stakeholders who testified at each session. So I would say disparate impacts is certainly would be covered by that. Potentially, we could spell that out. And I don't know if Buckley or Director Looney, you want to add to that?
I think, you know what, we'll work it out in subcommittee.
All right, thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That is the end of this panel. We do have some favorable witness panelist, Jorge Aguilar, Food and Water Watch, Antoinette, Ryan Johnson, City Union of Baltimore, David Wheaton, NAACP, Brian Weibel, Maryland, DC, AFL-CIO. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Corman, Vice Chair Boyce, and members of the House Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Antoinette Ryan Johnson, and I am the president of the City Union of Baltimore, a union for Baltimore City employees, including almost 400 city employees working in the city's water and wastewater department. We call for a favorable with amendments report for House Bill 1509. I have submitted written testimony, so let me be brief and summarize. Many of our proposed amendments should look familiar to you. This is largely because we offered them last year, and many of our concerns last year have come to fruition. For example, we offered last year an amendment asking that the proposed task force take 4 years to complete its study, and here we are now with a bill that says 1 year after that initial study, we should take 3 years to analyze the issue. We also asked last year that privatization be taken off the table by the legislature. And while we've heard public comments from electeds that privatization would not be considered, I am a union leader, and I know the old union adage, if a boss makes public promises, ask them to put it in writing in an enforceable contract. As such, if privatization really is off the table, put it in writing, put it into law, creating this work group. Additionally, even though there were public pronouncements that privatization would not be considered, the consultants advising last year's task force said that creating a regional model would require undoing the city charter that banned privatization. Again, I assure you that unless it is explicitly barred in the law creating the work group, privatization is indeed on the table. Finally, we are again calling for ample representation from the workers, both in the city and the county, to be on this task force. There are thousands of unionized workers whose livelihoods are at stake, not to mention their retiree pensions from 2 distinct plans. These employees are both city workers and county workers. Again, we call for a favorable with amendments report for House Bill 1509. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jorge Aguilar. I am with Food and Water Watch. Thank you again, Chairman Corman and committee members for having me. And I'm here on behalf of our organization and our 44,000 Maryland supporters to ask that you move this bill with several amendments to ensure some key protections for Baltimore residents and workers. Again, we want to thank Delegate Stein for his commitment to addressing and fixing the many issues impacting the Baltimore water system over the years. And most recently, very dutifully, doing that via his participation in this Baltimore task force. So thank you, Delegate Stein. A key lesson we did learn from the previous task force was that the task force members and their consultants were very much limited in their scope of study and inquiry to the letter of the law of the bill that passed last year that established that work group. And so there were questions that kept coming up during the task force that just did not fit into the language of that was passed into law. So then the task force did not necessarily go in that direction. And so we think it's really important this committee spells out the responsibilities as clearly as possible, given the magnitude of this endeavor around the Baltimore water system. So we believe the bill should include additional guardrails that were talked about and agreed upon at the task force that didn't make the recommendations. So I'd like to highlight 4. One is, again, explicit language in the bill denoting opposition to any type of privatization of the system that was promised by the task force and the region's elected leaders. 2, we'd like to see language asserting the safeguarding of current provisions in Baltimore around affordable rates for low-income households, the policy that stops shutoffs and programs assisting billing issues. And yes, the equity assessment should include language that looks at the disparate impacts on particular racial groups. And finally, we really do think that it'd be helpful to have low income and labor voices as part of that work group. So thank you again.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is David Wheaton. I'm an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, also known as LDF, and I offer testimony in favor of House Bill 1509 with amendments. Founded in 1940 by Thurgood Marshall, LDF is the nation's oldest civil rights law organization advocating for racial justice. Also want to thank Delegate Stein for serving on the task force as well. So we are pleased that House Bill 1509 instructs the new model work group to develop an equity analysis to analyze how the shift of a regional water governance model affects vulnerable residents. We have 2 amendments that we would like to propose to strengthen the bill. First, we would like to add like the legislation to specify that the equity analysis must include a disparate impact study examining the impact of regionalization on particular racialized groups. Second, the legislation should require the work group to not only analyze the financial effect of any possible transition, but require the work group to develop a plan to adequately compensate for any losses. Regionalizing Baltimore's water system could remove a $5.4 billion capital asset, which represents 47% of the city's total capital assets from city control. The task force report does not address how the city of Baltimore will be compensated for leasing its largest asset to a new entity, and there has been no effort to examine the economic feasibility of the city losing its largest asset. Removing such a large asset from the city could impact the future bond ratings, future credit ratings, and have implications on the future financial health of the city. There are also several questions that need to be answered by the work group before it can recommend a regional authority. First, it should, and study the impact of regional authority on low-income residents who are disproportionately people of color. Will rates increase due to transition costs? What measures will be taken to ensure that the most vulnerable residents do not suffer unaffordable water rates? And also regionalizing Baltimore's water system is an incredibly important decision. Again, we ask for a favorable with amendments report out of this committee. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Brian Wyville with the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO. I'm here today to echo the comments made by our union sister with AFT Maryland in regards to the fact that these workers in this system have firsthand and frontline experience with these water systems. They have valuable knowledge and expertise that would be of use to this work group. Additionally, it is important to recognize that as the bill spells it out, this work group will absolutely be dealing with direct workforce questions. One's about questions of the transition to the future of this new regional system. I would like to point out that even the first panel mentioned the fact that one of the largest things that the task or the work group has to deal with is the question of ultimate future pension liabilities. Public sector successorship labor law is extremely complicated. Labor has experience with these issues. Labor has dealt with these issues. I would like to flag that this committee itself has passed previous bills that added labor seats to important commissions and committees, recognizing the voice that labor has in providing perspective on these. Last year, this committee sat second seat on a bill regarding the future of a Baltimore Regional Transit Commission and added a labor seat for that due to the fact that labor had a voice to provide. Additionally, seats were provided on the ARAC committee for MDOT, recognizing that labor had a voice to provide in this process. As we move forward, the pension questions, the collective bargaining implications of this future regional system, it is really important that if this body hopes to get the actual answers to the questions before it, that it needs to have the voices in the room that have voting authority. So we encourage you to move forward with this bill, but with the amendments that we have proposed.
Okay, thank you all. Any questions for this panel? Okay, that concludes the bill hearing, colleagues. We are going to take a break till 4:45 and we'll reconvene to vote. So stretch your legs, check amendments, check to see if you're a co-sponsor already, and we'll be back at